Mm. Yes, we're live. I'm back with my friend Risto. Risto, how you doing?
Hey,
Did
good
I
to see you.
pronounce that right? I don't use your nickname too often.
Yeah, and to be honest, I probably can't pronounce it correct either. It's Finnish. I'm not Finnish, so you know.
Risto. Sounds like that. I think it would be. It's either Risto or Risto. Like a
Probably
wrist or Reist.
probably Risto. Most languages, the I
Long.
is it short or long, or I can't remember
Long.
which, but like
Do,
Spanish.
do you know any Finnish words
Yeah, I know some.
with an I in it?
Yep, with an I in it. Uh, Not off the top of my head.
Because Finland is pronounced with a short I. It's not Fiinland, it's Finland.
Well, but actually, Finland isn't the name of the country, though.
Oh, what is it?
It's Suomi.
Suomi. Ah, that could be your new nickname, Suomi.
But like how Germany, they don't call their country Germany,
Yeah,
Deutschland or whatever.
Deutschland, yeah. So what's going on? I'm sorry, I'm still a bit sick, but we were chatting on Twitter about a whole bunch of stuff. And you had some exciting opportunities for me, which maybe we'll discuss, maybe not, with the monastery there, your
Yeah,
contact
that
at
would
the
be.
monastery. But there was other stuff we were talking about, if I remember correctly, it was Israel, Palestine, that sort of stuff. Was there another topic that we were
I
talking
think we
about?
were chatting about, I think Israel, Palestine,
Yeah.
and do Mormons worship the same God we do?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we got into that a little bit. Yeah, of course they don't, unless they're worshiping it by accident. You know what I mean? Or as an exception, like where they say I'm Mormon, but I don't worship the God of Mormonism. I worship the God of monotheism. I mean that is possible. The example I like to use when it comes to religion and which God are you worshiping, the analogy I use is veganism. There are vegans who eat animal products, right? Uh, and so they're violating their own worldview. Sometimes out of weakness, like, oops, oh, I did it again, I didn't check properly. But sometimes they're just like, well, I'm vegan, but I eat meat. I think eating meat is the best thing, and they're just very confused about what a vegan is. Maybe they know, maybe they don't care, but they want to have the label, but they think meat eating is the best thing. So like they're just living with an inner tension or in rebellion. So it's the same thing with if you meet a Christian who believes in reincarnation, like, you know. Um, oh yeah, so before you and I get into some of the topics at hand here, what'd you think of my recent guest, the guy who played the guitar for us?
I enjoyed it when he played the guitar. Um, it was interesting. I'm not super familiar with like the men's movement, the various men's movement. I've heard about them. Um, I thought I thought it
Um,
was thought it was like he's arrived at like a good place in a lot of ways, and how he is as a father and husband. I don't know if he's a
yeah,
husband. Like he seems like he's at a good place with those things, kind of how he's approaching, viewing things as a service to your family. I aspire to that. I like the way that he's approaching his faith system. Like he started with just like a pretty standard church upbringing, it sounded like, in whatever we might call the Orthodox realm, small O Orthodox realm. And then he went atheist for a while. And then he's arrived back at a place where I don't know if he would say he's theist or not, but like he's using a lot of those terms from what he grew up with, but I'm not sure if they mean the same thing.
yeah. so I'm just checking my site now. It's Daniel Moody. That's his name. Daniel Moody. Yeah, I was a little bit astonished because he had all his reincarnation and, the sort of pantheistic idea or the monistic idea. I don't know which one he has. It's probably more of a Eastern monism, where we are from the same source, and just we are just fragments of God experiencing different perspectives, and God depends on, you know, us to bring him these unique perspectives that he wouldn't have access to otherwise. I'm putting words in his mouth here because this is just generally stuff that's floating around in alternative spiritual circles, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
I mean, I'm willing to bet that he agrees with most of what I just said. But, and I was New Age for a long time. I was an atheist. And while I was an atheist, I was a pantheist, and I was also a monist, and I was also dabbled with all kinds of ideas. That's what Chesterton said. It said the danger of being an atheist is not that you'll believe nothing; it's that you'll believe absolutely everything. And so it's kind of hard to parse it out when it's like, well, I believe this, and I believe that, and I believe that. Well, have you checked if they're all coherent among themselves? Do these beliefs, contradict each other? Oh no, I'm at the buffet of life, and I'm just tasting and sampling, and I like this and I like that, and that's the atheist mindset, right? Not
Which,
not to label the guy as an atheist,
yeah,
but he's leaning that
which
way for sure.
that's not without some merit, I wouldn't say,
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
As opposed to
because,
being dogmatically rigid and whatever. Yeah.
yeah. And because the risk with like a dogmatic, like really rigid position is, unless you happen to have landed in the one correct dogmatic rigid position, you risk not being able to traverse to where truth might be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For sure.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I sympathize with that, like he probably grew up in a church environment that wasn't really open to people being able to question things, that it didn't feel like we were really aiming at the truth. There was kind of an assumption of we already have the truth. There's no sense you don't have to try and find any truth.
Hey, my friend Nugloff is in the live chat. Excuse me. His name's Matt, and he's actually going to come on. He's finally going to come on the podcast soon.
Nice.
I'm really excited about that because he's been a friend, hanging around the channel for a while, lurking.
Yeah, I've seen him in the chat.
Let me see if I can find. Excuse me for coughing, but it's just the way it is. Let me see if I can find Matt. Maybe it's in. When is he doing it? Oh yeah, December 3rd, 3 p.m. on Sunday, December 3rd. So stay tuned for that. That'll be fun and exciting.
Yeah, I really loved seeing Jared's episode.
Jared, the ex.
Jared Higgins. Yeah, he's former
LDS.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was cool, and his attitude was a little bit like, how should I say? He wasn't ultra smiley, you know what I mean? So is he serious or just shy? I don't know. But he wasn't like super outgoing, but he certainly had a lot to say, and it was very interesting talking to him. But I was surprised for someone so young, or at least he looks young. I was surprised he's a little bit subdued,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, cool guy.
And I know him better than most of the LDS or Mormon or former Mormon that you've had on your podcast.
Yeah.
So most people that you've had on, I don't know very well. And I don't know him very well, just from like online stuff. Like we've actually had interactions, So I know a little bit about Jared, and then I also knew Sam. I know Sam, the
young guy.
Yeah. And so I was excited to see, because I had pestered Jared a little bit to go on your show. Like I wanted to hear his story, especially, if you changed like you were in one camp and you've changed, that's always an interesting, like how did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I like that he's honest and that he's he's, how should I say this? You know, he's retaining a sort of generic theism when he doesn't really have to. Like, I mean, he could go full bore into like just abandon everything and sort of come to it fresh and pick and choose. But I respect the fact that he sort of intuitively clings to at least that there's a God or there's something, that that's beyond him or whatever, higher power. I don't know exactly what his conception of this God is, but it's nice that he's retained that because he didn't have to, right? He didn't have to do that.
Yeah, and I don't know if he did the whole time.
Oh,
I think he'd mentioned this in his episode is like I think the LDS church kind of it, it members tend to when they come out of it lots and lots of them. It's not like they just land in some other church,
yeah,
in some other Christian church. They tend to
go wild.
go pretty secular, pretty atheist, like they've been sold a bill of religious goods, and therefore it's it's like, well, I'll examine Christianity just for a little bit, but not nowhere to the same level or depth as they examined their Mormon beliefs. And it's easy enough to come across, whatever the Christopher Hitchens books of the world or the Bart Ehrman books of the world and be like, it's just all bunk as well. I'm just disregarding that too. But Jared's kind of like in a crowd of like they've gone through that track and they're starting to arrive at a place where it's like, well, maybe I should question my naturalist atheist viewpoint as well, because once you start examining that, you're going to find issues too.
Well, yeah, that reminds me of something you and I were discussing on Twitter in the messages, which is it comes to mind because it's all about metaphysics for me. It's all about what is and and also epistemology. How can we know what is and what's foundational? And obviously, uh, if your metaphysics is wrong, then the edifice you build on that foundation, no matter how beautiful the edifice is, you're building on sand. So, um, you know, God's name is I am, Yahweh, however you pronounce it, and that's what we're supposed to build on. We're supposed to build on I am. We're supposed to build on that on ontological certainty, and we can know that God is by the light of natural reason. We don't need to take a leap of faith to know the I am, to know that self-existent being is the source of everything that's good. So that's why in my journey to back to God, it was very philosophical and seeking the truth as an atheist. And I'm living proof that you can come to God. It's not some theoretical thing I read in a book. I came to God through reason. And I know that you're shy about, well, do you really want to have reason above faith? And no, it's not above. It's not above. We're supposed to take a leap of faith, knowing that that creation implies a creator. You know, so God gave us intelligence, and we're able to um, deduce that there's an uncaused first cause, uh, a being whose essence is existence, a self-existent being, however you want to phrase it, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. However you want to couch, your little definition of God, we're able to know that by looking at creation. So it's not like the metaphysical foundation is some sort of elaborate rationalistic argument. It's not. I mean, we do try to formalize the arguments for the existence of God, We can do that, and it's very challenging to make it convincing for the atheist. But it's not about an elaborate story or argument. It's about it might be as it might be as simple as an intuition, because the intellect is not just argument. The intellect, the highest form of knowing is intuition, right? The lowest form of knowing is opinion, and in between the two you have science, scientific inquiry, and philosophy and stuff like that. But intuition is the highest form, and we can intuitively recognize when we find a watch that there's a watchmaker, and when we look at creation that there's a creator. So it doesn't have to be a rationalistic project, the metaphysics, because I felt you pushing back against that when we were chatting on Twitter. So I just wanted to make that clear. Do you understand?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I haven't heard that expressed that way before. So why would you say intuition is the top?
That's the established position in Western metaphysics, that intuition is the highest. This goes back to Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. Sort of the golden age of Western philosophy. It's just sort of been that's the tradition, and I intuitively understand why it's the most perfect form of intellect. I don't know if my definition is going to be adequate, but I would just say that it's more direct. It's more direct. It's an encounter. We have an intellect which can encounter the world, right? It can encounter experience. And so intuition is the most direct. And if you sit down and do a math exam or a science exam, and you've studied and you have all the book knowledge and whatever, it's a more indirect relationship that you have with that kind of knowledge.
Right. Whereas intuitively, if you have one thing and another thing, now you've got two of them.
Yeah, and you're sort of
You
like
experience that.
you're bumping into reality, with your with your mind. So that's I think I'm no expert on it, on metaphysics, or on what's called the simile of the line. That's what it's typically. Is it called the simile of the line? I'll have to look that up, but I'm no expert on it. But that's my intuition. That's my intuitive reasoning, because a lot of my own spiritual journey has been very intuitive and existential. I like to say existential in the sense that it's a firsthand lived experience, and I can't deny. I could be fooled. I could be fooled by my experiences. I could be fooled by my senses, but it's valid nonetheless. Like, this is what I went through. This is what I bumped up against. This is what I encountered. Like, I encountered life eternal. I encountered, with a direct sort of existential experience, the eternity of life, and so I I am prone to error, so I attributed that to myself. I took that on myself, that, oh, I'm God, I'm the eternal life, but I soon realized that I was mistaken. So yeah, the existential approach, the intuitive approach, it's also prone to error. But the nice thing about the this approach that brought me to God is that you can adjust, you can change course. You can test, well, this is what I believe. And I believed all kinds of crazy things as an atheist, as I told you. And you can just sort of like bump up against reality and say, well, that's a challenge to my worldview. That's a challenge to my worldview. That's a challenge to my worldview. And at a certain point, you just start saying, well, maybe all these challenges are because something needs to be adjusted. The axiomatic assumptions I'm making, maybe they're wrong. You know what I mean? So that's the beauty of the sort of intuitive stumbling through your faith journey approach. And like I said, I was an atheist at the time, and so I mean, I didn't have like a bias where it was wish fulfillment. I wasn't motivated to, as far as I know. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I was motivated to find God in religion. Right? I just stumbled into it.
Yeah, it seems like there's, even before the metaphysics or the faith, it's like, do I have a willingness? Would I even want to know the truth, or
Yeah.
do I just want to write? I feel like it's easy to want to, like, I just don't want to be wrong. I want to be right. I want to be able to win an argument, to be able to say that I'm right. It's kind of more about how I look than actually, engaging with the truth of things. Like I've seen this some in, I think his name is Alex O'Connor. He used to go by Cosmic Skeptic
Okay.
on YouTube. He's a younger guy, although less young now. But he's been kind of going on a journey where he would have been said he was pretty hardcore atheist a few years back.
Okay.
And now he's very much kind of in the middle of the road agnostic. And he says that he realized he was just looking at truth only through that very logical, here's a syllogism type of, what's the type of philosophy that's very analytic philosophy. And he said what he was missing, he said this in an interview recently, he was zoomed in on the painting and only seeing the brush strokes or the chemicals on the canvas, and he wasn't zoomed out to see the painting. It's easy to, if you only look at the natural properties of the painting, you can miss the meaning of it.
My friend Daniel Drazinovich dropped by. He says
Hey,
something.
Daniel.
Excuse me. He says something very interesting. He says, intuitive insight is only vouchsafed to thinkers whose entire spirit is intent upon knowledge. So it seems like that's a quote by, I don't know if he spelled that properly, Bertaev or something like that. So yeah, that's a lot to chew on there. Intuitive insight is only vouchsafed to thinkers whose entire spirit is intent upon knowledge. So you think about someone who loves the truth for the truth's sake. And, okay, it's spelled properly, Berdiev. I don't know how to pronounce it, but he spelled it properly. So, yeah, this is what I think. This is what I think it says in the Bible. Like, if you knock, I will open, and if you seek, you will find. And I think there are a lot of seekers, many young men in particular. I don't know about women, what they're seeking, but a lot of young men are seeking the truth for the truth's sake. And I'm sure women are too, but it's a different thing, I think. It's maybe less intellectual, not to say women are stupid, but it seems like more men are into that head knowledge as opposed to the heart knowledge. But even if it's an intellectual pursuit of truth, I think that that's what brought me to God. And so I see the value in it. Like I can never say that it's not valuable. I can never say that my approach was not valuable because it brought me to God. Of course, other approaches are equally valuable and probably more valuable, but
yeah, it's interesting. Another reflection on your interview with him is I've seen this a lot. Is
Jared?
Yeah, is people are taking psychedelics and coming away with the same message or teaching. And actually, Jared Higdon and Chris Hanna on their show that they do, their ex-Mormon
the porch thing.
Yeah, they talk about that some. Is this, you come out of your religious context and then you take these drugs and you have these conclusions about the world around you, these insights, these awakenings. And I think even Chris has said this some, is he's after started to question it, he's like, wait a minute, no, that's not true. That's crazy, whatever the insight was. But what's interesting to me is how many people are taking the substances and most of them coming away with the same conclusions. It's what's going on there,
Yeah, I have to admit that I'm very skeptical, and I think that illegal drugs are demonic and a gateway to the demonic, and that Satan is, you know, he's Lucifer. He loves to disguise himself as an angel of light, and love. Satan preaches nothing more than love to the seeker. He will preach love, 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 love all day long, and just pervert that notion of love just enough, just enough,
Mm.
So that's why I don't get all excited about people's stories about the wild spiritual experience they had, and the depth of it, and all the love and the light, and the interconnectedness and all that. I'm those things are good, but I'm aware that Satan's behind it, and that he will lie and manipulate people using drugs. I'm also aware that God is in control, and Satan can only do what God allows him to do. So I'm
Mhm.
also I'm also open to the fact that people can go dive deep into sex, drugs, rock and roll, and explicit Satanism, and come out the other side a better person,
Mhm.
because God's in control, right? God's using Satan. God's allowing Satan to do damage, because God can bring a higher good out of that. Always, always. Otherwise, God wouldn't allow it. So it's a complicated thing. We have to be cautious, but we also can't judge people who are taking a really crazy route to heaven, a really crazy route. Like we're talking about rape, murder, the worst stuff. That was this guy's route to heaven. That was his route to God. So it's a bit delicate to talk about this stuff, because all the darkness since the fall of our first parents, all that darkness was allowed by God to bring greater glory to himself, and to bring more and more souls to him. So it's a bit paradoxical, and we have to be careful. We always give credit where credit's due, and we don't call good evil, we don't call evil good. We have to be careful about all that, and at the same time understand that God's in control, and he has a plan, and it's a good plan. So
Yeah, I think the good thing is that if you're like hyper naturalistic, you're like the universe somehow came into being from nothing and just kind of now it's unfolding, you
yeah,
know, and none of my thoughts, none of my actions are my choice. It's just completely deterministic, natural universe that unfolds and then recollapses and then whatever happens. Like if that's your perspective of there is no painting, it's just chemicals on a canvas accidentally there. That one positive thing about drugs that you could take away that can open people's minds to see, because you'll have like even atheist people like Joe Rogan will be like, I'm, there's realms beyond our realm, and they're interacting with beings that aren't themselves. And so that like that could at least that could help open someone's mind to not being so narrow, as far as the naturalism. But my encouragement would be like I would be wary of what you're learning in those other realms. You should expose what you've been taught, what you've been enlightened with, to the same degree of discernment or examination as you did from your religious upbringing that you left.
yeah. Was Joe Rogan Catholic at some point? I seem to recall.
Yeah, he grew up Catholic. I don't know what that means, but
Hey, did you give a like to my thing on Twitter, where I actually got a response from Boss Rutan, or however you say it. He's like one of my favorite MMA fighters,
I
and
saw
yeah, so I'm like really excited about that, because he's become Catholic, later in life, and so I'm interested to meet him and talk to him about that. So that's just a little side note.
that'll be cool.
Because I was thinking about Joe Rogan, like he was raised Catholic, and now he's doing his own thing. And yeah, and there's the MMA connection, I guess, too.
Although Joe is like Joe's posture has really changed in the last year. You know, he used to be like very anti-religious, and now he's like asking questions in a way that I've never seen him ask. You know,
Oh, okay. That's good. That's good. Yeah, my friend Daniel Moody, who played guitar for us, that was really nice, by the way. But he said, what was I going to tell you? What did you just say? Because that triggered a thought about what Daniel Moody said.
Joe Rogan in the last year changing.
I can't remember what I was going to say, but it may come to me. It may come to me. But it was something controversial, like he had an opinion that was a little bit bizarre. It'll come to me. It'll come to me later. But yeah, the journey, the voyage. What, where would you say you're at? Because you're consuming a lot of faith journeys, watching my guests and other stuff on YouTube and thinking about different ways of navigating. Where are you at today in terms of like getting more on track? Because you have complained in the past that you're not maybe as on fire as you used to be, or something like that. Um,
yeah.
but how do you step back and look at your own journey and say, well, some adjustments here, some adjustments there, based on other faith journeys that you've seen?
Well, I still think Jesus is like where it's at. You know, um, based upon like what he did in my life. Um, there's nothing that I've experienced that's even in the the ballpark of that. Um, you know, I kind of my prayers these days are like for a willing heart. That's the thing that probably troubles me the most is like, well, maybe God wants to teach me and guide me and correct me, but just I'm being stubborn. So, um, so that's my prayer these days.
You sent me a text by a woman who worked with Sufi Muslims. Is that correct? Is it the Sufis? The
I
mystical
don't
Muslim,
remember.
the mystical Muslim. She's an artist. She does paintings. Remember?
No, I don't remember.
Yeah, yeah. You sent it to me, and
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, Lilius Trotter.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So in that, I read that, and I read it with some trepidation, but it was interesting. One of the
What
most
was your
interesting.
trepidation?
Well, she's not Catholic, right?
Okay.
And I'm
Okay.
scared. I'm scared of, heretical ideas creeping into my head. But there's nothing too shocking in it. But what I took away from it was more to do with the Sufi attitude towards submission to their spiritual master on earth, like a physical human being that's teaching them the way
Mhm.
of mystical Islam. And um, it's not a big deal, but it had an impression on me in terms of the willingness to listen and to be taught and these sorts of things. Because what they say, the Sufis, is that under the master, and this is just a human master, under their master or teacher, rabbi, whatever they want to call it, they are to be like a corpse that's being washed. So, the master will pick up the arm, wash here, put the arm down. It's just you're completely in the hands of your master, and there's no resistance in the corpse, right? None whatsoever. So that's the attitude that they're striving for, and it's really difficult. It's really difficult because I broke my wrist in a bike accident, and I went for physical therapy for months. I had two surgeries, and the physical therapist kept telling me, David, relax your wrist. Let me control your wrist. Relax your wrist. I'm like, yeah, I'm relaxing it. She's like, no, you're not. You're not. It's not. You're still, you know, controlling it or whatever. So I couldn't even make my wrist like a corpse, much less, all of me. So I know from experience how difficult it is to be supple and compliant and to to submit, you know, to abandon control, to a human or to God. And we're supposed to, that's what we're supposed to do. That's what we're supposed to do, but it's bloody hard.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I see it. I see it with my kids. You know, especially when they were younger. When there's times when it's like I know they should trust me. So set on whatever this thing is,
Hmm.
whether it's a fear or they really want this thing that could
Desire.
hurt them or whatever it is, and they're just so set in that, and they can't get out of that. Um,
That's how we are. Yeah, that's how we are.
so what did she say? So she wrote about that submission.
Yeah, she said
Sufi Muslims.
what she said is that we can cut out the middleman, and that we have the answer. It's Jesus Christ. And that there's a different way. Your way is arduous, your way is difficult, your way is fraught with danger, your way is not guaranteed, your way is bound to fail. And so she says, I admire your efforts, but why not just take on the light yoke of Christ? It's effective. It's safe and effective. So because people are making monumental efforts to be spiritual, to reach God, to discover God, and she's saying you don't have to do that. You know, you know, it's nice. It's a nice idea, and I appreciate the sentiment, but my God, what a waste of energy, and it's bound to fail. And you know how hard it is, and how few fruits are born through this practice. You've got a few examples of great men who rose to the heights, but even they're rare and few and far between. And what did they really achieve? Um, you know, look to Christ, and I would say look to the saints, because the saints were pliant and malleable in that way.
Yeah, she so most I think she was Protestant. I don't know what kind of Protestant, but and she's not well known in that world. Recently this lady wrote a book about her, and there was a movie made about her, which I highly recommend. I can't remember what it's called, Many Beautiful Things or something like that. um Actually, my favorite director, Akira Kurosawa, his son, I think,
Ah.
produced the movie. um so it's pretty well done, even though it's a Christian movie. um or at least Christian themes. But so she's not well known, but there's a hymn that's well known that some other lady wrote based upon reading her writings, called
Ah.
"Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus." So
Ah.
that's more well known. At least it was when I
Ah.
was growing up.
Ah. You remember some of the lyrics?
I don't. I can look it up. Let's see. So, and I don't think it's taken directly from her writings, but the themes are. It says, the hymn is, "O soul, are you weary and troubled? No light in the darkness you see. There's light for a look at the Savior, and life more abundant and free. Turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." So maybe it almost sounds like those words that maybe she was saying to the Sufis.
Yeah, I mean, it was called the Sevenfold Path or something like that. So she had seven main things that Christ offers, and it was interesting. She would take a Bible quotation from the Gospels and show how that was sort of fulfilling a desire that the mystical Muslims have. And she's like, this is the way, not your way, but this is the way. And you know, I wish I had the bullet points, Cole's notes in front of me so I could talk about the sevenfold path, but it was interesting. And I agree. I agree. I'm just like like I always say, I believe that the church, the fullness of Christianity is in the Catholic Church, so I would defer always to the church. What does the church teach? And what she wrote seemed true and safe, and I am open to learning from all kinds of people. But
Well, yeah, and just because it's in a Catholic church doesn't make it safe either, right? Like,
yeah, well,
came up recently, like Richard Rohr. Anytime
yeah,
someone brings up his work, I'm like, oh, we're in for a wild ride.
yeah, and it's funny. It came up a couple times with some recent guests, including Daniel Moody and I forget who. Oh yeah, my most recent guest. So yeah, but I think that even the heretics can come up with um, stuff that falls within bounds, you know.
Sure, sure.
And usually with a heretic, um, it's like 99% Catholic stuff, and then they have their little, you know, they stray on one or two little points, and for whatever reason you know, they're convinced that they're not straying, that this is valid, and it could be that the church will take the time to digest that idea and integrate that idea. So, it's not like even like the heretics are necessarily wrong. They're not necessarily wrong, and there might be a kernel of truth in there. It might be just the way it's expressed, or it might be so it's not black and white. Like you can have a crazy idea today, and then 50, 100 years later, the church has understood it and integrated it. You know, um, so yeah, it's not a black and white thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I get the impression with Richard Rohr, based upon, I haven't read his stuff, but based upon um, what I hear people say about it or how they're embracing it, that it's kind of this Christian term, but meaning something very different.
Yeah, like what we hear about is the universality, the universal Christ, and
Yeah.
suddenly you start thinking about sort of New Age ideas. Um, it would be nice to see some bullet points on this. Right now, I'm just searching for some ideas here. I'll
Yeah.
have to I'll have to read up on it.
The thing is, so like a lot of this stuff, I don't know how to characterize it. You mentioned New Age, or you might say like progressive Christianity, or it used to be called, for a few years, it was called like emergent Christianity.
Uh,
And it that kind of I feel like that realm of Christianity, if it is Christianity, I don't know, but it tends to like purposely be like trying to nail Jello to a board. Like, just the way it's set up is it doesn't like to answer very concrete questions. It likes to, you know, it kind of, in reaction to maybe like the really harsh fundamentalism maybe it reacted to, it, it doesn't, he's like, you call it unorthodox. It doesn't really care about orthodoxy. It's all about reinterpreting everything, and, it's having a new orthodoxy, or orthodoxy doesn't even matter kind of perspective. Um,
or there's a meta orthodoxy that will reconcile apparent contradictions down below at different
well,
lower
and it's
levels
like,
or whatever.
yeah, it's purposely constructed to be hazy and vague.
Yeah, I'm going to read you a couple of controversial quotes that on this one website that I stumbled upon. It may or may not be a good representation of where he strayed, but it just says, he says in one of his writings, he asks, what if Christ refers to an infinite horizon that pulls us from within and pulls us forward too? What if Christ is another name for everything in its fullness? So I am able to interpret this in the Catholic way. I don't know why the church can't, but I mean, I can, because I'm a monist at heart. I think there is only Christ, there is only God, you know, um, and the reality of God as God, um, makes the even the human nature of Christ that he took on nothing, relative to the Godhead. The reality of the Godhead is just infinitely more real than the reality of the human nature that Christ took on. So, but even if we acknowledge the reality, because the second person took on flesh and became human, even if we acknowledge sort of the everything of the God man Jesus Christ, that he is everything, that's still a Catholic idea, you know. So I don't find that too controversial. It does lend itself to a sort of New Age pantheistic thing, but you can read it many different ways.
But I think that's how it works. That's what I was trying to express earlier. Is it's a sort of code that runs that doesn't trip the error or the you
Right.
know it doesn't, like, what in programming there's like a something checking, like there's a checking type of mechanisms. It's a
Right.
type of code that's been constructed that runs, and it doesn't quite kick the errors, and you don't realize till like further down the road, um like, what the outcome
That
is.
it's a
And so
virus.
it's a few times, if you look at mainline Protestant churches, like, you, you can see what the outcome of the
Uh-huh.
code is, because it's already been run. um
Another quote by him, which is basically the same thing. The essential function of religion is to radically connect us with everything. So similar sort of idea. A criticism of him, it says, in Rohr there is a blurring together of a very biblical distinction between God and us. So again, we can read the blurring of the distinction between God and us. Yes, it's a reality. The distinction is real, but theosis is also real. We are going to have that intimacy with God. That is the goal, is to, it's like if I asked you about your relationship with Julie, like, are you two or one? You can say both. We're two and we're one. There's an intimacy, there's a union, and you know the there there's a spiritual oneness. St. Paul says in Ephesians, the two become one flesh. The two become one. So I can read, you know, the blurring together. Yeah, well, it is blurry. Like, it is blurry because it's a paradox. It is blurry because it's a paradox. And
but
they're
it
two and one.
Yeah, but it would be like if you, like, hey, can you get her to come say hi real quick? And I said, well, I mean, Julie is everywhere. Julie is integrated into my deep self. You've already said hi to her,
If
David.
you've seen me, you've seen the Julie.
That's right. That's right. And that, like, but you're like, no, I was talking about, like, Julie in a different way, like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
Julie who wears shoes. Sometimes I worry about, like, when people are talking about Jesus in this realm of new Christianity,
Uh,
is this a Jesus that wore sandals?
yeah.
Is this a Jesus that's coming back with a sword in his mouth? Or
Uh-huh.
are you talking about something different?
Yeah, 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 yeah. There's definitely that danger. And I mean, I'm not saying that Richard Rohr is not a heretic. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, he's playing with ideas that I'm sympathetic to. Here's another
Sure.
quote. Here's another quote. He says, "You might say that the eternal Christ is the symbolic superconductor of the divine energies into this world. Jesus ramps down the ohms so we can handle the divine love and receive it through ordinary human mediums." So this sounds like a pretty flaky analogy, but you know,
So I would say there's part of me that actually prefers the Richard Dawkins and the Christopher Hitchens.
mm.
Their code kicks errors. You instantly know. They're like, no, there is no Jesus. He's a fairy tale. You shouldn't believe in him. You're terrible for believing in him. It kicks a code. Either it's like C.S. Lewis said, like liar, lunatic, or Lord. But if you just, squish him into like he's your peanut butter sandwich too, that's making you at one with the world. I mean, that's not the Jesus that saved.
Yeah.
I agree with you. The Jesus that saved me has aspects of that,
Yeah.
of transcendence and connectedness, but that's a different thing. That's usually what's being said, by that.
Yeah, I agree with you. He says, when you can honor and receive your own moment of sadness or fullness as a gracious participation in the eternal sadness or fullness of God, you're beginning to recognize yourself as a participating member of this one universal body. You are moving from I to we.
I think it seems like it is just taking Eastern religion and just putting a skin of Christian lingo over the top of it. Now, granted, like we were talking about Sufis earlier, it's not like Eastern religion's just all bad,
Right.
or that Western religion is all good. Like I think probably Western Christianity, they missed the boat on some things,
Yeah.
and could adopt some of those Eastern things, but there are some fundamental differences. It's kind of like when Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" Like that's an important, and I think that's where it's a different conversation.
Yeah, let me read a couple more to you. God has worked anonymously since the very beginning. It has always been an inside and secret sort of job. The Spirit seems to work best underground. When above ground, humans start fighting about it. So, I mean, it's true, in a certain sense, God he's pure spirit, he's invisible, and history, if we look at history, salvation history, or even secular history, with the eyes of faith, we can see God writing history and the way that God moves through history and the way God shapes history. And like the story of Cyrus is a famous example of God using secular characters to shape salvation history. And, that's just one example. It's like everything that's happening is not ordained by God, but at least permitted by God, and so shaped by God in that way. And so, like the sort of the anonymous workings of God, yeah, it's not that controversial of an idea, but I'm just wondering why he's emphasizing that and what he's driving at here. But the idea that humans start fighting about it when the Spirit is sort of more accessible to us and less hidden, that's something you're wary of too, right? When people start bickering about doctrine.
Well, so I'm kind of two minds on that one. One is, I would say that a lot of like this perspective, a lot of these groups probably are not big fans of the Apostle Paul. It's kind of harsh sometimes. He's not embodying their kind of Zen perspective. But that being said, actually, I was reading stuff from the Apostle Paul with some LDS missionaries these past couple weeks. His letters to Timothy, and I was kind of convicted by those letters, because he does warn Timothy. I had a couple quotes from him. He does warn him about getting distracted from like the main focus and getting involved with just like arguing about words and like that. So Paul does, like, he talks about doctrines, and he's not willing to like call people out and call bad ideas out. But there's also this element of like you see it with Timothy of saying like it's easy to get just in the weeds with that kind of stuff and lose track of like what you really should be focused on. And for me, that was convicting. Like when Paul is talking about just arguing about words on, I'm like, oh man, I think I do that a lot online.
Yeah. Daniel says, have you guys heard of the term eschatological optimism? I've only heard about it from Daniel himself, but I'd be curious to learn more about that. I mean, eschatology is the end times stuff, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think Christians have to be optimistic about the end times. I mean, we're going to heaven, right? So, hopefully. So yeah, that's where it's called good news for a reason. So yeah, I think eschatology. We can't be pessimistic. I'm just going to read you one more quote here. It says, our impulse does not need to wear the name of religion at all. Love is the energy that sustains the universe, moving us toward a future of resurrection. We do not even need to call it love or God or resurrection for its work to be done. So he seems to be rebelling against names and labels and these sorts of things. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I think that again, it has to go with there's some other philosophical motivation. It's not just like, we've really tapped into like the core of Christianity. We've gone deeper and we've found the core, the core of love. I think it's another philosophical, you know, like the postmodern philosophical endeavor wants, uses language, for its kind of way. And it doesn't like to be like kind of pegged down, although it does like to force, it changes things through language. That's its method of change. But it's also very,
Elusive.
yeah.
He says, unless we find the communal meaning and significance of the suffering of all life and ecosystems on our planet, we will continue to retreat into our individual small worlds in our quest for personal safety and sanity. Privatized salvation never accumulates into corporate change because it attracts and legitimates individualists to begin with. Think about that, he says.
I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, I mean, he's railing against individualism. I think that's valid. Personal safety and sanity. Yeah, I mean, like I always say, your neighbor's your hunger is a physical problem. It's a material problem, but your neighbor's hunger is a spiritual problem. So I think that's what he's driving at here. Is like there's a spiritual commitment that Christians have to have to the neighbor. I mean, this is pretty basic Christian truth, right?
Yeah, maybe he's driving at that. Again, I'm pretty suspicious of all this because it's a type of code that if you're coming from a certain perspective, it's like, well, yeah, that I can see how that works. I don't necessarily disagree with that, but what he's meaning by it is probably different,
So here's another quote. For Jesus to become Christ, I mean, this sounds strange to say. Like, I mean, Jesus is Christ. I mean, I don't think Jesus became Christ. I think Jesus is Christ. For Jesus to become Christ, he must surpass the bounds of space and time, ethnicity, nationality, class, and gender. Frankly, he must rise above any religion formed in his name that remains tribal, clannish, xenophobic, or exclusionary. So let's think about that one. Yeah, do you agree with
well,
me that Jesus did not become Christ, that he is eternally the Christ?
yeah, I heard an ELCA minister say recently that kind of a similar thing for Jesus to become the Messiah or the Christ, he had to learn to become unreligious. It's kind of
Okay.
he probably read Richard Rohr's book, is my guess.
Yeah, he must surpass the bounds of space and time. Well, Christ in his humanity is bound by space and time, right? Wasn't he? And in his Godhead, he was not bound by space and time. But it's like there was never a time when the finite was infinite or where the infinite was finite. The infinite took on finitude in the human nature. Like it's just like, um, so I seem like some category errors here possibly, unless he's just being poetic, unless he's talking in a way that's more to do with us as Christians, as little Christs, how we need to surpass the bounds of space and time, how we need to surpass ethnicity, nationality, class, and gender. No longer Jew, no longer Greek, no longer male or female. Maybe he's talking about that, on a human level, as Christians. He says we must rise above any religion formed in his name, any religion that remains tribal, clannish, xenophobic, or exclusionary. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, he's describing false religions or false aspects of religion, right? If it's tribal, clannish, xenophobic, and exclusionary, that's either a false
I mean,
religion or
it depends on how you're defining that thing. Again, I think a lot of folks in these crowds would see Paul as kind of that way. Paul's kind of like, like if they could cut all of Paul's writings out of the scripture, they would,
excuse me. So, conclusion. The universal Christ and his reconstruction movement are all about justice and connection. Yet it's worth noting that Jesus described his gospel dividing people, not uniting them. Luke 12 says, "Do you think that I have come to give peace on earth? No, I tell you, but rather division. From now on, in one house there will be five divided, three against two, and two against three. They will be divided, father against son, son against father, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, mother-in-law against her daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law." So the conclusion is Jesus was teaching a radical truth that he knew many would reject, and that by rejecting him, they would remain separated from God. The justice we see in Scripture holds those who oppose God and his ways accountable for evil, with Jesus taking on God's wrath for those who repent. So, yeah, I agree with that. I'm wondering, this is renew.org. I'm not sure what this organization is. They may
yeah.
they may not be Catholic, but
Yeah. I mean, you can, again, like I would encourage like all Catholics to look at look at the kind of the track record or the history of what's happened in the Protestant world. It's a very clear, it's not so clear while it's happening, but
right.
in retrospect, it's very clear, like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And not all the steps are like completely bad. Like there's some very legitimate like concerns and criticisms and stuff that needs to be dealt with. So I'm very sympathetic to a lot of it. But
My friend Daniel says the slave whom Hegel describes has no eschatological thinking. He does not believe in infinitude. He refuses to cross paths with death. So Hegel had that master-slave dialectic, right? And Hegel put Christ as the ultimate slave archetype.
Mhm.
And he mocked, and I think his student Nietzsche, if I'm not mistaken, mocked Christianity using Hegel's master-slave dialectic. And, I'm not sure about Nietzsche, like if he was sane or if he was secretly Christian, or it's hard to know. But
Yeah, it's interesting. Philosophers, when I don't know much about philosophy, but as I've started to look into their lives, lots of them like were just like single dudes who just sat around thinking all day, and like I look at the course of their life and it's not necessarily something I would want to emulate, or be taught by. I wouldn't want to be my rabbi. If they had control of my life, like to give a lot of these philosophers, it's like, no way, but yet they've been so influential and so many people listen to their ideas.
yeah, yeah, it's true. That's a good point. It's like um, we don't necessarily spit on the crazy homeless person. I've seen it happen though, but we certainly don't think, "Oh, I'm gonna grovel at his feet and see what gems of wisdom he has in his thoughts," in his erratic, drug-laden thoughts. very few people are signing up to like, oh, I want to dig into your mind and find out what wisdom you have. But if it's in a dusty old book and it's got a nice title and whatever, they'll dig into it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a very good point. That's an excellent thing. I hadn't thought about that perspective on the great minds of Western philosophy. And of course, I'm exaggerating a little bit by, picking someone who's really down and out, but some of the philosophers were. Some of them were down and out.
I would say most of like the big influential ones, again, were like, it's not like you look into some of these philosophers and you're like, oh, like they got married, they had a few kids, they held down a job and did some really good philosophy, and then like you're like, oh, I really respect that, I want to follow in their pathway. Most of them are not that.
That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. I guess we should read more female philosophers because they're probably more down to earth.
But it's very smart that they avoid it. There's probably a reason that there's not lots of them.
Yeah, because they're practical. They're practical people. Very practical.
Well, plus that's one area where philosophy needs to understand its, and I haven't heard this expressed even as I've dug into philosophy a little bit, is like, what are the limitations? Like some people say like science can just tell us everything. That's like a nearsighted view that doesn't understand the limits of what empirical science can tell us. So the same with philosophy is like, what are the limits and pitfalls of philosophy? One is you can just get so lost in your thinking and in your mind and be pretty sure of where your conclusion is, and maybe your other philosopher buddies can't tell you otherwise, but that doesn't mean that you're correct. All it takes is like this one other thought out here that you hadn't considered out of the billions of potential thoughts to correct things. I say this as someone that spends too much time in his head just kind of trying to think through things. That's where like Julie is a great balance for me, is because he's good.
So there's a story about Bishop Barclay and someone Johnson who kicked a stone to refute him or whatever. It was Dr. Samuel Johnson. So I'm trying to see if I can find the story here for you. After we came out of the church, we stood talking for some time together of Bishop Barclay's ingenious sophistry to prove the non-existence of matter. He was an idealist, Barclay. I guess he and his friend were outside of a church talking about the crazy ideas of Barclay, denying the existence of matter, and that everything in the universe is merely ideal. I observed that though we are satisfied his doctrine is not true, it is impossible to refute it. I shall never forget the alacrity with which Johnson answered, striking his foot with mighty force against a large stone, till he rebounded from it. I refute it thus, he said. So, so sort of like this pragmatic refutation of idealism in this case, but a fancy philosophical hypothesis generally, just like like just sort of like a lot of the time when someone's talking nonsense, you can sort of slap their face to wake them out of it. That's like that kind of vibe, I guess.
Well, and that's why I don't trust the philosophers a ton, especially if they weren't married. Because it is good to have that very practical, pull you down to earth perspective of a wife.
Yeah, well, I just picture now, I picture also David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, with his problem of induction. We can't know that there's cause and effect or whatever, and but he said famously that all of that stuff goes out the window when he's just down at the pub having a drink with his buddies or a nice meal.
Right. And it's it's a philosophical conclusion to say that having the drink at the pub with your buddies is less real than what you figured out, in your chair,
Yeah.
in your academic work. It's like, is that less real and meaningful? I think that's where the intuition comes in, you need to merge both of them, I think philosophy is good at checking for errors in thought, but maybe not so great at coming to conclusions about like the ultimate truths. But like when I go outside and like I see a beautiful moon, I can philosophically think about it like, is this just light reflecting off of an orbiting satellite around this planet in this vast universe of just natural things? Or can I also see the beauty of like what's happening there, to see beyond just the paint particles? And I think that's real. Like that beauty is real. It's not just some sort of like perceived, kind of reality. It is like substantial. It's as substantial as the physical particles themselves.
Yeah, well, when we think about, I used to think a lot about beauty and goodness and pleasure and stuff like that, and how hard it is to quantify and to qualify, really, and to identify. You know, um, if you just think about, like, I mean, I could ask you, like, do you have any happy memories? Maybe your wedding day or something, like, and you just try to tell me what it is about that day or that hour or that minute or whatever, even if it was a good taco that you had. Like, if you just try to articulate, try to narrow it down, it's very elusive. And we are not just material beings in the material world. We are spirit. We have a soul, and there's a supernatural element to our lives. You know, not only the joys and the pleasures, but the sufferings too. So it's like, you know, um, we I think we intuitively know that there's a mystery at the heart of everything that we value. And if we lose sight of that intuition, or if we don't have that intuition, then wow, it's just going to be a bunch of concentration camps trying to gather data for, like, how long can a human go in extreme temperatures, or it's just going to be that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to remember what the philosophical, um, I don't know if it's that idealism that you were talking about, but there's the philosophical principle that there are no wholes, just things made up of
Plenum,
like the,
plenum,
what
the plenum,
I
as
don't know,
opposed
but
to a vacuum.
there's no chair. It's just individual simples made up in a chair-like fashion. What
That's called
philosophical?
that's called nominalism.
Okay, nominalism. So when I listen to nominalists talk, well, they'll express the philosophy, and then they'll be like, "But I live my life and I talk in such a way where things aren't nominalist and determinist."
Yeah.
And my response would be, the way you live your life, that's the actual more real thing. Like and I guess that's the intuition kind of coming out. Now they could say, well, I just do it so people understand me. So you're coming in line with everyone else's intuition, but I think that's more profound than that. I think they really do believe that they are the person that they are, not just this collection of things. And I think they really do believe that they have a choice in matters,
Yeah.
Because it's easy to say, like, I'm a moral anti-realist, but if you hang around them for like a month, and especially if you bother them bad enough, it's going to come out. They really believe that morals exist.
Absolutely. I'm with you 100%. There's a lot of hypocrisy and self-delusion. Like, oh, I'm a this. Like, they've got like 12 isms that they subscribe to. I've met Christians who have figured out their theological position and they have 12 isms within the context of their Protestant Christianity. And I
Yep.
guess Catholics can do it too. You know, I'm I'm a Scotist, I'm a Thomist, I'm this, I'm that. You know, and I've got my preferences. I've got my preferences, but I don't lead with that. I don't lead with that. You know, I say I'm Christian, I'm Catholic, whatever. But some people lead with it. So there's a sort of, you can hang your hat on these isms, and you can also have an identity in a group, and you can poke fun at the other people that don't agree. But the problem, you know, I often think about identity politics because, you know, I oppose the state of Israel and Zionism, but you know, I posted on Twitter like how disgusting it was that here in Montreal someone drove by at two schools and shot them up. And some of my like racist acquaintances on Twitter were like, "Well, I don't care," and whatever. It's like, I don't care. They're our enemy. The Jews are enemies, and the Jews are this, and the Jews are that. And how can you defend the Jews and whatever? It's like, well, because they're human, like, because it's like, because you don't kill your enemies, you don't just do a drive-by on your enemies. Like, even if you think the Jews are totally evil or whatever, which I don't, uh, that's that's not the Christian way of getting justice. Like, do a drive-by? What? And you're telling me you're Catholic? You know, it's like, so the identity politics, you know, I've got some ideas that my acquaintances agree with because they seem like right-wing ideas. I've got some other ideas that the lefties agree with because they think they're left-wing ideas. But it's just like, you know, if you catalog all your opinions, which are subject to change, by the way, if you catalog them all, there's no one on earth that will exactly agree, like, or that will match your set. Like, you've got a unique set. You've got a unique set, and it's a changeable set ever in motion. It's always in motion, right? We're changing our minds. We're changing our ideas. And you know, I was just talking to a friend last night about Israel Palestine, and he said some stuff, and I'm like, well, if that's true, then my position is the opposite, right? And he said, well, don't take my word for it. Look into it for yourself or whatever. But it's like I'm open. I've got a couple of principles that I work with, right? Like, I'm against hatred and, you know, violence that's not justified. Like, if self-defense is justified, but you know, most forms of violence aren't. Like that drive-by against the Jews here in Montreal, there's no way to justify that. There's no way. There's no way, right? So my principle doesn't change. I could learn some things about history where I would change my mind about, you know, good guys, bad guys, but I already know that. I already know that it's complicated. I already know that I can't read the heart. I already know that the people I think are bad guys might be mostly good guys and vice versa. So identity politics, that's what I'm saying, is it's a sad game. It's a really sad game, and everyone's so excited. I lost a bunch of friends on Twitter recently, and I can't figure out, and frankly don't care why. But the idea that you would unfriend someone because they disagree with you is, to me, is just like, it's a bizarre attitude to have. It's a really bizarre attitude to have. They could do what they want, but I mean, I just find I can't relate to that, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I'm probably guilty of this sometimes, you know, our sensibilities get so offended that that we can justify things. We're pretty good at justifying things.
Yeah. So we didn't really talk too much about the Israel-Palestine thing, but we have to wrap it up here. I got to go feed my wife. We're gonna have pumpkin soup. I'm gonna make pumpkin soup. But any other bullet points you thought we could touch on today, just briefly, or any final thought?
Well, I'm thinking I need to, you know, I brought up Timothy, Paul's letters to Timothy,
Yeah.
which I probably need to go back and read again. I do remember being struck by a bunch of things, convicted by a bunch of things in that letter, you know, one of them being like this maybe I'm getting distracted about just arguing about like all this little minutia doctrine or philosophy stuff online. But then the flip side of that was it's distracting you from something else. And I'm just thinking as we're talking, like, I need to go back and like really, it's like, what was he saying to focus on? You know, because one thing to not get distracted, but then the second thing is like, it's so that you can focus on this better thing. That's why a distraction is so bad. is because there's this much better thing, like I'm eating dirt when I could be eating this amazing taco.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's this, secular philosophical school called essentialism, where you take stock of your priorities and you say, well, why am I making this stupid, useless hobby a priority? Why am I doing that? Hey, I'm gonna relegate that to a lower position. And this other thing I've been neglecting, why have I been neglecting it? Hey, I'm gonna put that up higher on my priority list because I know it's better. It's better for me, it's better for my community, and it glorifies God more or whatever. So, I mean, this is a secular philosophy. I know an atheist who sort of was telling me about it, and I don't claim to understand it. He just gave me Cole's Notes version of it. But it's basically what
Mm-hmm.
is essential? What is essential? So for me, in my Christian walk, I always think every day about that. I always think about that. You know, what is essential? What is essential? What am I focusing on? What should I be focusing on? What am I neglecting? And so for me, I think about, you know, like right now, what is essential in my Christian walk? It's to know God, to love God, to serve God, and obviously the reason is so that I can be happy with Him forever in heaven. So to know Him, how can I know Him? I can know Him through the Bible, through the church, through community. Um, how do I love Him? I love Him by keeping the commandments, right? Like so virtue and uh, loving God for God's sake and loving neighbor for God's sake. And then how do I serve Him? Well, that's a little bit trickier, I guess. How do I serve Him? Um, I would say, I mean, I don't really understand how to serve God, but if I think about the life of St. Paul, he wasn't just content to hide away, so he had to do outreach and he had to suffer. And um, I'm not so clear on how to serve God, but what do you say to that as in terms of the essentials of the Christian walk?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds right. I think, then it comes down to the practical, just the everyday. um you know like, I think I mentioned walking in the woods and praying as a good thing, but I haven't done much of it. But I think that would be a good thing, at least for me, in the practical here and now. um there is an element also of like our heart and our will, that willingness to let God be our our teacher, our rabbi, you know, like you said, to be that corpse in his hands.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So goodwill, yeah, I agree. Like goodwill, I have a simple formula. If you want to go to heaven, I use this on atheists. Like when Aaron Ra was confronting me and attacking my Christian worldview, I just said, look, if it's true what you're telling me, that you only have goodwill, then I've got good news for you. You're going to heaven. You're going to heaven. If you only have goodwill, you're going to heaven. But what I failed to mention was goodwill involves, you know, um, it involves rendering to God what is due to God. We can't ignore it, because like a lot of the atheists, they like to say, well, I don't murder, I don't do adultery, and I don't. They name sort of some of the practical commandments, and they are very proud that they don't violate them, but they always forget about the first three, right? They forget about the first three, which have to do with God, like especially the first one. Like, I mean, I'm sorry to tell you, but it's not true that you only have goodwill because you have bad will, because you're violating the 10th commandment all day, every day, all day, every day. So there's only invincible ignorance, but what was that citation I gave you from the Bible the other day about in Romans, you're without excuse if you don't acknowledge your creator. I mean, you're without excuse. There may be exceptions to that. Maybe some people don't have the capacity to figure out that God is God. But generally speaking, I think for for every normal adult, you can't be an atheist and have goodwill.
Hmm.
So I'll let you have the final thought, a little closing thought. My friend Daniel says you're an optimist, so leave us with an optimistic thought.
I don't know. I think this is the first time I've ever been called an optimist. I don't really have much of an optimistic thought. I would just encourage, myself is like, go walk in the woods and pray and check out Paul's letters to Timothy. I don't know what walk you're on, but that's what I'm going to be up to. So
Very cool. So the hour and a half went by really fast. I don't feel like we really um got too deep into what we were talking about on Twitter, but it doesn't really matter. We'll come back around to other topics next time, and look forward to talking to you again soon. Okay.
good to see you.
Don't forget to pray for me and mine always. Okay.
I'll do it.
Praying for you too, my brother. God bless you. I love you.
Adios.
We'll talk soon. Enjoy the tacos.